بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والسلام
In the name
عليكم
of
ورحمة
Allah,
الله
peace be
وبركاته.
upon you and the blessings
Ladies
of
and
Allah.
gentlemen, Your Excellencies, honorable guests, before we start with our evening, allow me to introduce a very brief note to all our Arabic-speaking listeners and viewers. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. قبل أن نبدأ
Peace be upon
بحديثنا
you. Before
لليوم
we start,
اسمحوا لي أن أقوم
allow me
بالتعريفة السريعة
to
جدا باللغة
give you a
العربية.
quick
إذا ما
introduction
تحدثنا عن
in
هذه
Arabic.
الأمسية فهي أمسية
This
سيكون الحديث
evening,
خلالها باللغة
we
الإنجليزية
will be
ولكن
using
هنالك
English
ترجمة
as
مباشرة
the main
على
communication
قناتنا
language
على
for
الفيسبوك.
this
فإذا
event.
كنتم
But
تريدون
there is a
الاستماع إلى الحديث
direct
باللغة
broadcast
العربية
on our
أنصحكم
Facebook
أن
page if
تتابعونا
you
على
wanna
فيسبوك. أما إذا
If
كنتم
you want to
تتابعونا على
listen
يوتيوب
Arabic,
فالحديث
follow
سيكون
up on
باللغة
Facebook,
الإنجليزية. أما
but for
بالنسبة
Arabic in
لكل
English.
الحضور الأكارم الموجودين
But
معنا
for Arabic, sorry, on
اليوم
YouTube.
لايف ما
Those who
أجمل
are
أن
with us
نعود
today
نرى
live,
هذه
it's very
الوجوه
nice to see
البسوسة
those good
والطاقة
faces all over
الإيجابية
again
الجميلة
and
من
this
بعد
very positive
كوفيد كل ما
energy
هنالك
after
له
the
من
COVID
صلة.
and
شكرا
everything related
جزيلا
to
على
it.
تواجدكم
Thank you very
معنا
much
هنا
for
اليوم.
your attendance for
وأود أن
today.
أنوه أن
I would
الحديث
love to
سيكون
tell you that
باللغة
we will be speaking
الإنجليزية
in English
في
language
خلال
basically
الأمسية.
through
فإذا
the whole
أردتم
night. So
الاستماع إلى
if you want
الترجمة
to listen
المباشرة
to the
يمكنكم ذلك
direct
من خلال
translation,
الأجهزة
you're allowed to
المتاحة
do
أمامكم
so
على
through
الطاولة.
the interpretation
فأرجو
devices you
منكم
have
أن
or the
تقوموا
headsets you have on
باستخدامها.
the
وإذا
tables.
أردتم أي
Use them,
مساعدة
please. If
يمكنكم
you
إعلان
need
أي
any
من الأشخاص
requirement,
الموجودين
kindly
حولكم.
ask the
وشكرا
technicians all
لكم.
around you.
اسمحوا لي أن
Thank you very
أنتقل
much.
من
Allow me
جديد
now to speak
للغة
in
الإنجليزية.
English language.
Your Excellencies, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and thank you. Thank you for being here with us for this outstanding evening. Welcome to an evening like no other, where we're reflecting on women, discussing women, focusing on women. As we all would like to believe, women are as important and as men are in any community. And today we are talking during our UN talk and focusing on women at work towards gender-responsive recovery for Jordan. And of course, we're talking about the fourth pillar under the UN socio-economic framework for COVID response in Jordan. So when we're talking about our evening for today, we are gathered here to focus on and showcase the UN joint support to national partners in responding to the health crisis and its economic impact since its onset, while strengthening holistic partnership for, I would say, an inclusive recovery phase. And of course, that is present and is going to be presented live here today through different points of views, through different partners who come together to find a solution to a problem that we all know we are facing nowadays. And we're talking about the UN, the government of Jordan, and the private sector. They're all here to stay and to speak this evening. So without any further ado, allow me to welcome to the stage with the first part of our evening with an outstanding presentation about the impact of COVID-19 on women's economic empowerment, and it's going to be presented to us by Hazar Asfoura, the program analyst of UN Women 20.
Thank you and welcome everyone. Your Excellencies and dear guests, welcome to today's UN talk about women at work towards a gender-responsive recovery for Jordan. My presentation today is going to be brief and it will focus on the impact of COVID-19. Thank you. The impact of COVID-19 on women's economic participation. Please. Next slide. Mina, okay. So we will start with a brief about the context of women participation in Jordan. As we all know, labor force participation in Jordan is weak. It's considered as weak as it's around 34%, and the labor market is deeply segregated according in consideration to gender. So we can see that women are vertically and horizontally disaggregated in the labor market. Horizontally, we can say we know that they are concentrated in two economic sectors that are aligned with their gender roles, which are education and health. While horizontally, we know that few women reach decision-making positions, and as well for women employers, we all know they are very few. In addition, they are concentrated and predominantly in small and micro in size, according to their, considering their businesses. When we are talking about unemployment, we know that the whole country, both men and women, are facing high rates of unemployment, especially among youth and women. As the unemployment rate for women right now in 2021 in the first quarter was around 28.5%, 4.2 percentage point more than last year. And this is directly linked, of course, to COVID. And in considering youth, it's almost 45%. All of this have long-term as well, long-term implication on women. As we know that few women reach the pension or fulfill the pension eligibility criteria. As we're going to hear from His Excellency more today, only 24% of women of pensioners are women in Social Security. About the impact of going forward to the impact of COVID-19 on women's economic empowerment and participation. We're going to focus on the market and non-market spheres. For non-market spheres, that means the household production, which are predominantly done by women, carried out by women. As we can see here in the graph, pre-COVID context, it was already significant gap between women and men in regard to total or the workload in hours per week. And you can see the difference here is related to unpaid care work. And we can see after the pandemic, the gap has been exacerbated and became even close to the double between men and women, as you can see in the graph, which this means that women are under a considerable time squeeze, which impact their ability and capability to retain in the labor market and to undertake all their carry out their responsibility and stay in good health at the same time, of course. About in the market spheres, which it's related to the paid employment and income, women also, although that women are less impacted than men, we can see that they are concentrated in what is considered in pandemic context as critical sectors. And therefore they are experiencing intensified workloads and increased work-related risks. And why they have faced less adverse impact than men, because of two reasons. The first one, that few women are working to begin with. As we know that less than 10% of women are working in Jordan, women above the age of 15, while women are concentrated in those two economic sectors. While men are distributed among the economic sectors that experience high, medium, and indirect contractions. For the high contractions, as we know, accommodation and food. For the medium contraction, construction, transportation, and for the indirect, that's financial services and public administration. If we're going to go and discuss the impact of government measures impact on the employment, we can see that without no government interventions, we have 12.4% of working women would have lost their jobs. But after the government interventions, it's estimated that this percentage was reduced to 6.6%, which indicate how the measures were important for jobs protection. The same goes as well for men. Of course, as you can see that the percentages are higher because, as we see before, more men work and they are concentrated in more where in economic sectors that experienced more contractions. For the policy recommendations, as we all know that there are a number of policy recommendations that for the government to take into consideration while they plan for the recovery from COVID-19. And the importance to be gender aware, that can counteract the economic crisis induced by the pandemic, at the same time will be able to address the gender gaps. And we are going to focus on 5 major policies. The first one, which is the fiscal policy, and the importance of the fiscal policies and fiscal expenditure to be gender aware from the design to the implementation and control and monitoring. And to take into consideration, for example, for stimulus packages that take into consideration where our women are concentrated as business owners, and to provide them the same opportunities provided to other businesses. For gender responsive budgeting, to guide this fiscal expenditure and to develop as well and provide gender responsive indicators that can control and measure what have happened, and as well according to the measures, and to do the necessary amendments and reforms. In regard to social protection schemes, as we're going to hear, it is fundamental to have social protection schemes, as we have witnessed in Jordan, whether contributory and non-contributory. Social protection schemes and network was fundamental in the recovery and response to COVID-19. And it is important to raise the awareness for women to be covered and included in the Social Security Corporation coverage, for as well introduce new programs, as we're going to hear about maternity insurance, care program, or barnamij ri'ayah, and its importance to provide more of a supporting environment for women to enter and retain in the labor market. For as well the gender inclusive crisis management, to include and representation of women, it is fundamental as well and critical, so they can be represented in all phases of the planning, implementation, and monitoring, as well to be in the decision-making circles. Finally, for the private sector engagement, and again, it's critical. All of those policies are critical because we know that the private sector is the engine of growth, economic growth and recovery, and one of the tools that is introduced by UN Women and UNGC, which is women empowerment principles that support women entry and retention and promotion in the private sector. I'm done here, sorry, because this is a brief presentation. All of those information is available in reports done by UN Women and available in websites. I'm happy, after the session, if you have any questions in regard to the presentation, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Hazad, for all the details that you provided us with. And before we continue with our evening for today, allow me to remind all those who are watching our live via social media platforms, Facebook or even YouTube, you guys have the chance to participate and be part of our active UN talk for today. All you have to do is share with us your reflections, any comments or ideas, ideologies that you would like to share with us. We would be more than happy to hear them. And by the end of our panel discussion, we are going to be reading some of those reflections to our honorable panelists, and inshallah we'll be hearing the right answers from the right people. So we are live with you right here for today. literally on ground, and we're super happy about that. I mean, the excitement that we're feeling now that we are live on ground, that doesn't mean that we're not taking all the precautionary measures. We do have spaces and we are being very careful, trust me. So it's time to start with our talk for today, and allow me to introduce and welcome to our stage our panelists for this evening. Allow me to start with Mr. Anders Pedersen, the UN Resident Coordinator, if you may, Mr. Anders. Dr. Salma Al-Nims, Secretary General of the Jordanian National Commission for Women. His Excellency Dr. Hazem Rahahle, Director General of the Social Security Corporation. Her Excellency Nadia Saeed, CEO of Bank Al-Ittihad and Women Empowerment Principles Signatory. And Her Excellency Miss Maria Hadiotia, the Ambassador of the European Union to Jordan. Thank you, dear panelists, for being here with us this evening. Before we start, allow me to just point out one very important thing. When you would like to share with us your thoughts and ideas and answers to some of the questions that we have, please turn on the mic. Afterwards, I would like to kindly request from you to turn off the mic so that we'd be able to hear all the panelists clearly. Once again, good evening, and thank you for being part of this outstanding evening. I would like to start with you, Mr. Anders. So let's talk about the overview of the UN role and I would say joint support to advance women's economic empowerment in Jordan under the SEF and beyond.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for all of you coming here tonight. It's an absolute pleasure. You know what? I think it's quite a statement that the moderator has to start by saying that women are as important as men. I think that in itself says a lot, that is even something that has to be said. I think you can even argue that in many ways, particularly when we speak recovery, women are more important than men. And that's going to be one of my messages tonight. I also would like to acknowledge that very often when I start these kind of conversations and I'm looking at the room when we speak on gender equality, very often I ask actually those men in the room to raise their hand. And very often you can see that there are only some very few of us. But you know what? Tonight, I think there's almost as many men as there are women. And I really would like to congratulate all of you men that have come tonight, because I think one of the key messages is precisely this. Gender equality is not primarily a women's issue. It is as much a men's issue. In any way, and in many ways, it's us, the men, that actually will have to make the change. And I think that's one of those key messages that we have to take with us. Now, of course, for me to be now on the podium here tonight is an absolute privilege with so distinguished colleagues of ours. We all know them very, very well, and I know that we're going to get some phenomenally exciting examples on what actually can be done. And let me also acknowledge my colleague Siad from UN Women and his colleagues, because they are the one leading us in the United Nations family when we're trying really to do our utmost to put gender equality at the core of what we all are trying to do. Now, when I prepared myself for tonight, I went actually around and asked some of my female colleagues, so what is it really that you think are the key issue at stake? How come that despite all these efforts that we're making collectively, that we don't get more traction? Because I think it's interesting to notice that actually on the question about gender equality and women's economic empowerment, there's really no differences in what we want to achieve. There's no sensitivities in what we want to achieve in between government policies, in between international community, in between NGOs, or anyone else speaking on this. We want to achieve the same thing. At least that is what we are saying. And nevertheless, despite all these efforts, we haven't come further, as the presentation was just telling. But you know what my colleagues were telling me when I then really asked them, what is going to be my opening line tonight? And you know what they said? We are ready. We are ready to actually assume the challenge. We are ready as women, and particularly as young women, to take the challenge on. Just let us do that. And I think very often when we speak about this, it tends to be that women are getting boxed in and sometimes even become their own enemies on breaking that glass ceiling. So I'm calling upon women, and particularly young women, really take it on and stand up and really show that you can be the game changer. Without you, it won't happen. Now, what's exciting today in Jordan, I think, is, and that is what we're going to hear tonight, that we see many, many constructive and positive initiatives. We see it at the policy level very, very well, and I think I won't in any way try to preempt what Salma is going to tell us just in a minute, but we see some really interesting things when it comes to the national strategy for women that, of course, being worked on very closely with UN Women and many other colleagues in the society. We see all the efforts done by the government to actually mainstream gender throughout all sectors of work. I acknowledge this. I think it's key. Without this, we won't be able to make that breakthrough that we need. But I also say it's not enough. We need to do more. We need to do more of evidence-based investments, really in the care economy, to create women-friendly workplaces and support women's transition from informal to formal economy. And again, I think the figures that were just demonstrated by the UN Women, they speak to us loud and clear. There are few things that can be as powerful as statistics, isn't it? The number crunching can be your most important message. And I think the numbers, they tell us a very, very clear lesson. They tell us what we have to do and where the issues are. I think that we have to be very clear that we have to strengthen the capacities of all national institutions and systems on gender equality and on women's economic empowerment. We have to work through the systems that we have. It's not something that can be imposed from the outside. It has to be coming from the inside. And I very often think that people like me, and who am I to speak with any legitimacy on an issue such as gender equality in Jordan, coming from Northern Europe, coming from a country that is relatively well known precisely for gender equality. But I tell you, we are not that different. I've been working on gender equality all my professional life. And I can tell you the issues you're facing in Jordan are not that different from the issues we were facing in my countries some years back. We can learn from each other, we have to learn from each other, and we can drive that agenda forward together. I think it's exciting to see, and I think we're going to learn much, much more about that tonight, how we have evidence from so many different countries that underscores really how social protection measures can be used as key policy instruments to drive gender equality and women's economic empowerment. If I'm not incorrect, I actually think that the head of the Social Security Corporation will speak to us precisely about that tonight. And I can tell you, I've been briefed on beforehand that everybody's waiting for you to speak, and that there's something extremely exciting to see in the way that actually you are taking this agenda forward within your institution, and you're actually moving from words and commitments into action. And honestly speaking, there are too many like me speaking and too few of you doing. So really kudos to you and really the way that you're driving this agenda forward. Because the reality is there's really not any competition between economic priorities and those kind of social protection systems. They actually mutually reinforce each other. And I know that from so many other countries, we see that this is actually the prerequisite for the level of growth and the level of economic development that we've seen. That we engage, that we get women into the workforce, and we get out of this dilemma of exceptionally low female labor participation rates in the region, and of course in Jordan in particular. And last but not least, we have to engage and we have to see how the private sector can lead on gender equality. We know that without that growth will only be happening if we get the private sector to lead. But we also know that that won't happen if we don't have women in the private sector leading. So I'm really applauding the initiatives that we're seeing from the private sector and from members of the panel here tonight on precisely doing that. Show us the way forward. Show us the way it can be done. And again, show us the way that the private can work with the public, and with people like me and all my colleagues, we can actually make it happen. So I think my end kind of message or my end kind of pitch to you tonight is really engaging women in work can be the game changer for the recovering from the pandemic. And we know this for a fact. We know that from so many studies across the globe on how you can really institute a change. And we know that in Jordan, it's not about going back to what it was before the pandemic. It's simply not good enough. And that is what actually brought us to this stage of vulnerability, of lack of resilience. Getting the women into the workforce, getting the women actually to lead us on that, that can actually be the game changer that we're all looking at. So really, ladies and particularly gentlemen here tonight, I think we are on it. I think there's such a platform to actually work upon. But I think we have to do precisely this. We have to move from the talk into the real action, and there's a lot to be done. The investments we are making, it's simply not generating the kind of results and the aspirations that we're looking for. We have to be able to do better, and we can only do better together. Thank you so much, and thank you so much for being here tonight.
Mr. Anders, thank you so much. It's not because I want to explain, but because I want women who are listening to us maybe revisit what you said, Mr. Anders. When we're talking about women, especially in the Jordanian society, and excuse my super honest thoughts and views, if you go around, if you go outside of Amman in specific, and we most definitely call it a bubble every now and then, when we go outside this concept of yes, the woman is powerful, yes, women can do this, yes, women are allowed to go to conferences, they are allowed to travel around the world, they are allowed to do this and they're allowed to do that, and they're trusted by their husbands, by their families in general, and most importantly, their brothers and fathers. And I'm talking reality here. Numbers are speaking realities. I might have started my opening remarks with saying that yes, women are as important as men, because there are women who are living in different governors who don't know that, who's been taught that she is less, unfortunately, and it breaks my heart to say it, who has been taught that you should be serving, you shouldn't be speaking up, you shouldn't be raising your voice, and most definitely your voice shouldn't be heard. And this is the ideology that I believe we need to work on in order to see the change that you, Mr. Pedersen, have been emphasizing and mentioning. Thank you. Thank you for your honest thoughts. So allow us to move on to our second speaker for the day. Dr. Salma Al-Nims, Secretary General of the Jordanian for Women. So when we're talking about the government of Jordan, it launched 2020-2025, the National Strategy for Women, in March of 2020, just as the COVID started. And the strategy includes a specific pillar to promote women's economic empowerment, and that's happening through a holistic approach that recognizes the needs to, I would say, cross-sectoral investments at various levels to accelerate the progress. I mean, yes, maybe we can consider the COVID-19 pandemic as a setback for a year now, a bit more, but let's focus on how can the NSW be leveraged to respond to structural challenges and emerging opportunities.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. First of all, I want to pick up on what you said. I have to say that the diversity in the Jordanian society is actually more complex than what you explained. It's not, women are not weak in the governorates, powerful in Amman. I think that actually if you look at it, even wherever the concept of unequal power relations is not related to geography. Within every part of Jordan, you could see women who are able, powerful, can travel, who are in the army, who are from different governorates. And in Amman, you can see a woman who is suffering from, for example, violence. Actually, if you look at the numbers of violence, actually you will find that they are in urban areas more than in rural areas. So let's not just generalize, but actually, yes, there are structural issues, there are unequal power relations, there are structuralized issues within legislations that affect women empowerment, autonomy, access to economic opportunity, and which is related to discrimination, not only within laws, not only within households, it's also within the public sphere, where discrimination is also practiced informally, not only through laws. So yes, let's go back to the National Women's Strategy as a very important tool that has 4 important pillars that we cannot focus. And here, I want to take this opportunity that we're in the UN talks, and probably there are other representatives of other donors, to talk about the importance of not focusing on the concept of economic empowerment without looking at the other areas that are affecting women's ability to actually enter the market. Unfortunately, for the longest time, we keep investing in what we think is economic participation without looking at how do we create the right environment and enabling environment. This starts with definitely changing the society and social attitudes, and how gender roles are stereotyped and divided within the household is definitely again, as Hazar was talking about, unpaid care work, I'm telling you, no matter what, even if I'm paid 3 times my salary, if in the end I'm going to be drained, tired, then I will not stay in my job. I will go out of that job if we are not able to be, first of all, to create the right environment inside the household where the fathers also have a role, considering that a woman is contributing to the and that's why there is a pillar within the strategy that looks at that aspect of how do we create positive gender relations within the family, within the society, that would create positive engagement of what women can do within the household and outside the household. This means that we need to work multi-levels on that issue. But also at the same time, I believe that the fact that the personal status law is still not giving women, recognizing women's economic participation within the household, then why would women continue to do that if it's not going to be recognized? So I'm saying this because we have the donors, and I want to say, if you want to say what your starting message was, my starting message, I would say, it's not trendy, it's a necessity. And why I'm saying that? Because now I believe that the care economy is one of the most important areas that we need to work on. But what kind of care economy? While we believe that childcare, for example, is one of the most important parts, suddenly all the donors are throwing all their funding on only daycare for children from 8 to 3 o'clock or 1 o'clock, which is great, but not enough. When we look at this, I've been speaking to the Ministry of Education for the longest time, saying, what about mothers who work in the private sector till 6 o'clock? We're talking about the private sector now. This is where we want women to go. We are not going to keep going to the public sector. Nobody is thinking about it. What about shifts daycare? What about caring for the elderly? And how is this falling on the child, on the woman? So I'm saying that we need to start opening up and diversifying how we look at solutions that would give really women and families the opportunities to actually enter the labor market. That's on one side. But now I want to just also take us back to the fact that we have a national women's strategy. We also worked with UN Women on developing an addendum. I don't want to go through what Hazar has said, but there is an addendum that was submitted to the government saying how the COVID situation has contributed to its impact on the priorities that we've established through the National Women's Strategy. And then the government, and we were talking at Pillar 4 of the national strategy, which is gender mainstreaming policy, which says that the institutions and the government are able to carry out, adopt policies, produce the right data, and also direct funding towards gender-responsive policies and plans and strategies. And then the government develops suddenly a priority plan, economic priorities for 21-23 without any consultations of the national women's strategy. I spoke to every women business association in Jordan asking them where they consulted. They were not consulted. You read the document, and we've just submitted to the government 5 pages of comments on that document that it did not respond to the challenges that affected women's access to the market. Women business owners of kindergartens that not most of the businesses that are owned by women, they employ women. We've been asking for example, a fund, and that was directed to the donors, directed to the government, for a fund to support specifically small and medium-sized businesses that are owned by women. Because we also tried to get from the central bank that how much from the $700 million that were released through the change in reserves to loans, how many businesses owned by women benefited from them? And of course, because there is no data, no right classification, we could not find out if women benefited from these. And we don't know who benefited from it. This means that we are a long way from really looking at the national strategy as a tool for the government to change an entire situation. We need data, we need coordination between the donors, and when we talk about coordination, we talk about working on all the pillars at the same time. And then we talk about responsive policies. Now, I would leave to His Excellency to talk about what the social cooperation did. But of course, again, we have to look at this, that there are issues that are affecting women. Flexible hours, for example, talking about policies. We have now the bylaws, but the question is, how are we giving the incentives to the private sector to actually adopt them? And how are we making sure that the fact that I'm working part-time, or I am working shorter hours, or I'm working from home, is still ensuring that I am contributing to my retirement package, that my pay is not going to be affected, that my income is not going to be affected. And finally, informal, and I want to wrap it up with that, informal discrimination practices. Sadly, so far, we don't see that there are changes or real laws and instructions affecting these practices. Women, till today, go to the civil bureau, and they are told, you cannot get your passport, and I am getting these cases till today. Although the law is clear, you can get your passport without your father's, if you're over 18, that's it. Still, they are being told you cannot get it. Women are still being asked if they are pregnant. It was yesterday in a report in Al-Ghad, but I already wrote to the Minister of Health, for example. A doctor is actually asked if she's planning to get pregnant before being accepted to a specialization program. These are practices that are still happening in Jordan. They are built on how do we think the role of a woman is inside the society. So this strategy is not a beautiful document. It's a document that means that the government has to say, we mean business. That we see that the political will is actually beside a nice document that makes us look as a country amazing in a global stage, but in the end, women are still unable to pay their loans in the governorates and in other areas, still are losing their jobs, not accessing equal opportunity to jobs, getting discriminatory practices, pay gaps, all these issues. Although we have the NCPE, we have the support of the donors and the ILO, UN Women, but yet the change in the structure is not happening. And what we need today is the right coordination. We need, and I will end with that, we need that for the donors to work together with us to ensure that funding is not going towards trendy things. It has to go in a right, balanced, inclusive way where all the national strategy is implemented, not what is trendy today. This is very important to us in order to actually have the right shift, the transformation for women, not to only be in the labor market, but to be in a decent labor market where she gets her own autonomy according to the strategy, where she makes decisions over her life. Thank you.
100%. Dr. Salma, thank you so much. Of course, we're not underestimating what women are capable of, and they proved that they can do in different governorates. This is a salute to every single woman out there who made it happen, who opened the project, who created job opportunities to other women and men in their local communities. I mean, we have excellent success stories, but again, we're looking at the majority of where we're standing, the things that we'd like to change. Since we're talking about things that we would like to reflect on, we would like from our audience via social media platforms and with us live here, once you hear of a specific, I don't want to say problem yet, an issue that needs to be fixed, and you have a thought of what the government should be heading towards, or how should the private sector be acting towards this specific issue, we'd absolutely appreciate it if you can write it down, give it to one of our staff so that we can reflect on it at the end of our discussion with our panelists. And via social media platforms, please do share your reflections, comments, and notes via the comments area. Allow me to move on to our third panelist for today's Excellency Dr. حازم الرحاح لعطوفة المدير العام المؤسسة العامة للضمان الاجتماعي. عطوفتك إذا ما تحدثنا عن الأدلة العالمية على خلينا نحكي الدور الرئيسي.
If we speak about the main role played by the different systems in creating an environment that sustains women work in the labor market. If we look at the previous years in response to the corona pandemic, there has been some work done by the Social Security Corporation. You had different programs and social protection programs. Could you please speak more about those initiatives, because some people weren't able to hear about it or to comment on it?
Okay, thank you, Lynn. And because I will talk about two complex topics, which is social security and women, I would prefer to speak in Arabic. So excuse me. الضمان الاجتماعي يعني
Social security.
الضمان الاجتماعي
Social security.
جميع
How do we perceive it?
على مدار عقود
All of us, throughout ages, we've been perceiving it in a traditional manner. It's for social protection, an institution that provides two types of securities: pension, death, and another one for injuries of work. Now, it developed as a system, and we started with the disruption of work insurance or security and motherhood program of 2011. And today we're speaking about a very big challenge related to the COVID-19 pandemic. So today we have to get out of the conventional box of thinking. As a corporation, we've been dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic as an opportunity, not a challenge. We focused on three main pillars. One, empowerment of private sector, or enabling it, because it is our neck, our backbone, he means. And we've taken different measures starting off March at the outbreak of the pandemic. We had an order to support, he means a law, to support the private sector, because the private sector is the employer and all of our revenues are basically based on the contribution of the private sector. So in the pandemic, we faced another challenge related to covering the wages of those who work in the private sector. We've dealt with it, by the way, through different programs like Tadamun program, Solidarity in English, and Istidama, Sustainability and Ta'afi, Recovery, among other programs. The third pillar is compensation pillar, because throughout the corona pandemic, all of the employees faced cut off their salaries. So we had to deal with that. To be blunt, as a corporation, we weren't able to or willing to take gender into consideration, but the results of our packages and programs were for the benefit of women who work in the private sector, women or girls. And this is related to the nature of our programs and to the sectors we focused on. The education sector, for instance, and as you know, women work more in the education sector than men. Today, the percentage of women or female covered out of the total number of the contributors of Social Security Corporation is about 25%. Consequently, those who benefited from our own programs, which is Istidama, the most important program, 50% of the beneficiaries were females. So females benefited from our programs. And if we speak about percentages, they have benefited more than males. However, in this context, it's more important to learn from this experience, the corona pandemic experience. As my colleagues said, they said that the main challenge we face today as an economy, as Social Security Corporation, is the weakness of women participation in the labor market. If we speak about inclusiveness, our coverage to females is higher than males. However, the problem is that women economic participation in the labor market is already weak. Throughout corona pandemic, as a corporation, we did not stop of thinking of new tools and instruments related to the pandemic and for the benefit of women, protecting women and enhancing women's role, because we know today that the weak link is women, and for different reasons. I'm not knowledgeable or expert of gender issues, but from my corporation's perspective, today the main challenge is that. If we speak about poverty, females are poorer than men, and our role here is very huge. The role we should assume as a social security corporation. So during the pandemic, we've developed different bylaws and as a readiness step for the post-corona stage, because this is only an intermittent period, but after the corona, how will we be able to deal with different circumstances or economic setbacks like the corona period? We have maternity security. We cover 10 weeks of maternity leaves. In 2019, we've amended the Social Security Corporation law and we've expanded our coverage to include the cost of daycare. Today, the main challenge of women after delivery of children is the cost of child care. This is a big burden on women today, so we've expanded our coverage to include the cost of daycares, and now the cost covers 6 months. We've launched it in 2020, and until today 12,000 working women or employed women benefited from it. And the later stage, next week by the way, we will start financing the operational cost of daycares. The daycares, as you know, financially they're unstable, and we know that females work more in daycares. Almost no men work in them. So this is related to the promotion of women economic participation all over again. There are a few things related to the coverage of women and the Social Security law. We face a challenge related to the changing atmosphere of work. Like we have now home-based businesses, we have different freelance professions. So we changed our laws last year. We amended our law, and now our law can deal with the different forms of the new professions, whether at home or freelance. This is, by the way, for the protection of women and for the encouragement of women to get engaged in labor markets. There are different programs in the future, and for sure they will support women, by the way, males and females participation in labor markets, like the health insurance. By the end of this year, we will start working on health insurance coverage, because if an employed woman is covered, when we speak about the pension, any disability, maternity leave, injuries, in addition to the health insurance, it will for sure motivate women to work and get involved in labor markets. The experience, by the way, was better, was actually was a real opportunity for us to rethink and revisit our own programs and laws. And our law, the Social Security law, is not excluded. Today, our role is different. It's non-conventional, unlike before. Dr. Salma has spoken about partnerships. And as you know, as Social Security Corporation, we're one of the corporations that work with different stakeholders. And we met before, and Rima Aslan from the ILO, Reem Aslan, her name is Reem, know that. As a team, we perceive things in an inclusive lens, but we have to look into the details through the experts and subject matter specialists, especially those who are experts in women affairs and labor market. And this is in brief about our role, a brief about our role, and my colleagues and I are ready to answer any inquiry. So, based on what you said, Your Excellency, first, you've mentioned what Ms. Salma said. You seconded her, and you've spoken about enabling the private sector. But what about those institutions that focus on women and that employ women? On what basis have you supported such institutions? How did you enable those private sector institutions? If I speak about public sector empowerment or enabling private sector enabling or empowerment, we had different measures, different programs, some of them related to reducing the fees, and also in Tadamun we paid partially the salaries. It was launched in April 2020. In addition to Stidama today, another program, and 1,500,000 benefit from it, whether males or females. 50% of them, by the way, are females. For the networking, our programs, our programs before had different gaps, but after negotiations with the related stakeholders, we reached a stage where we have aligned all of our programs with what is needed, especially those working on women issues. Noting another point, and I'm sure different women, especially a mother who's working, would love to hear your answer. You've spoken about the coverage, the cost coverage of daycares and assisting working women by covering the fees paid for the daycares. How much is the fees? And any woman can benefit from it, whether she works in the private or public sector?
احنا في عندنا برنامج رعاية.
We have رعاية program and Hazar explained it.
له مسارين.
It has two paths.
حضانات مؤسسية.
One for daycares, and we provide direct cash assistance to any working woman based on her salary. The higher her salary is, the less support she receives from us. Those who work with 300 JDs or under are supported with 60 JDs per month. If her salary is between 300 and 500, she's given 500 and 40 JDs for any salary higher than 500. We have another program which is home daycare program. If a woman selects to keep her child at home, as we know, she keeps usually the children with the mother or in-law, with her in-laws, and they're the weakest link. We provide her with 25 JDs per month if the child stays with her in-laws. And we're having another amendment in the future. Today, the maternity leave, we want women to be covered for the 6 months previous to the delivery date, due date. A woman sometimes has to take a leave before her due date, delivery date. So we'll be flexible, you know. We'll give her like 8 months before she delivers and after she delivers, and those are flexible months. This is something important related to our maternity program. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, and we'll speak more about different details related to the Social Security Corporation. And the audience here and our social media audience would love to ask you different questions today.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to go back to English and allow us to move on and talk with Her Excellency, Ms. Nadia Al-Said. She's the CEO of Bank Al-Ittihad and the WEPS signatory. Good evening, Your Excellency. So if we're talking about the growing recognition of businesses having to, I would say, a stake in and a responsibility for gender equality, women's empowerment, not only as the main engine for growth and employment, but also as an equal partner in promoting women's leadership in the workplace, marketplace, and community levels. As a female CEO and signatory of the Women's Empowerment Principles, would like to hear from you. What are the approaches that should be used to challenge systematic barriers hampering women's participation in the private sector to sustain, would say, sustainable and gender-responsive recovery from Jordan?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Good evening, everybody. Actually, I always have engaged in conversations with most of you about our approach to enhancing economic participation of women. And maybe I'll try to touch on some of the things that we always discuss and try to add a lens of the challenges that COVID posed, or the new situation that COVID posed and how did we try to deal with that. To start with, I think, I'm sure in the presentation that I missed part of, context has been explained, and I think context in Jordan is known to everybody. I think we all know that economic participation of women is very low. It's at 14%. It's very critical. It's one of the major lost opportunities for Jordan. We always say that only if we increase economic participation in Jordan to the level where it is in MENA alone, then we can boost economic growth and GDP. Different studies tell you different numbers. Some studies take it up to 5%, which I think even if it is 1%, I think we're a country that is challenged to find different ways to boost GDP. And I find this one of the hidden opportunities and one of the real enablers for growth in Jordan. And when we look at what happened, so women were challenged to start with, and when we look at what happened during COVID, you see that employment loss was prevalent, and income instability was also prevalent. And of course, that affected men and women, but we clearly saw that women were more affected than men. And unfortunately, gender equality has regressed in the workplace. We were following up what's happening in Jordan, and we were happy about some improvement that was taking place in the past years. But with the COVID situation and with pandemic situation, I think things have regressed a bit, and which actually imposes or puts a responsibility on all of us to try and put more effort to see what we can do. Of course, during COVID, women faced the extra burden of having to shoulder all the unpaid responsibilities at home. And you know, socially in Jordan, somehow it is always assumed that it's the woman who has to shoulder that responsibility, and it's the woman who has to be at home. We know that during the pandemic, children had to stay at home, and someone had to be at home to make sure that kids were actually attending school and all of that. And the assumption was that it is women, so women actually were really negatively affected by that. And sometimes I think, and I wonder, the example that happened in some of the countries, for example, UK. In UK, actually, they put everybody home, but they sent the kids to school. And that worked, actually. It worked from a pandemic point of view, and it worked from a system and support point of view, because the parents were at home and they were quarantined. They were not actually mingling with anyone. The kids were going to a safe environment at school, and the parents were working from home, so the kids were going to school. So I thought that was a really interesting formula, and I think that is an example that always came to my mind when we were talking about opening schools or not opening schools. What are we going to do if something happens? And part of the context as well, there is a study that was conducted by Deloitte in 2021, and it clearly showed that 59% of the women surveyed clearly indicated that they are spending more time doing their domestic tasks. 35% indicated that they are spending more time taking care of children, and 24% they said were taking more time taking care of dependents and elderly and children and such responsibilities. The other thing is that the same study showed, which was very interesting to me, is that the women felt that they were expected to always be on, because, you know, people were working online. So they were expected to be available. They were expected to be on all the time. And 63% of them felt that the employers evaluated them based on the time they spent online, not based on the quality of work done or what has been achieved, which is quite intriguing, I found. And another recent study by ILO also indicated that it's clear, and I think this is worldwide, it's not only in Jordan, that women actually were negatively affected disproportionately, because women happen to be in the sectors that were mostly effective, and that is more so in Jordan. I mean, most of the women in Jordan, especially the business leaders or the women-led businesses, are in SME, and a lot of them happen to be in tourism, a lot of them happen to be in event management and so on, so they were really negatively affected. And you know that with the pandemic, unemployment rates increased worldwide, and in Jordan it reached up to 30%, up to 23%, sorry, but amongst women it reached more than 30%, which is a loss. And as I said, for me it's very sad because of the progress that we have been trying to do. For us at Bank al-Ittihad, we have understood this context, and we have understood that it's our responsibility to try to do something about it, and we try to be part of the solution. We try to look at the part of the glass that is full and look at what is it that we can do to change the reality. So to start with, I have to say that as an organization, gender equality is within our DNA. Our institution has 45% women. Actually, if we remove some of the support staff, like the drivers and some of the support functions, it's 50%. We have 100% equal rights, equal pay, equal benefits. Health insurance is for the woman and her family as much as it is for the man and his family. Actually, all the benefits are exactly the same. During maternity, women take their full maternity, and they're allowed to take some extra time depending on certain circumstances, and they're paid whatever they are eligible to according to Social Security law, and we match it. We double the pay actually during their maternity. Of course, we have all these checks and balances across the pipeline to make sure that there's no discrimination. And we're all about equity. We're all about equal chance to everyone. We do not discriminate for women. We just make sure, and that's why, hence, I believe the 50%, we just make sure it's a place that women feel, and everybody actually feels it's a safe place that will give them an equal opportunity. And we really believe that diversity is a great part of our success, and it's a great part of our brand. Having said that, in 2014, we felt that if we don't own the first mover advantage in the market, no one else would. Our brand or our DNA is that. So we launched the first full banking proposition for women in 2014. And actually, it's a full proposition of financial and non-financial services for women, and it addresses women as business leaders, women professionals, and even women as in their capacity as the decision makers in the household. And I have to say, other than the national responsibility, definitely it's an opportunity. Definitely it's a great business case. And I tell you today, where I stand here, our portfolios have grown 5 to 8 times in everything across the board. So it was a success story, and it was a great opportunity. With the lens of the pandemic, I will say that because of what happened, we actually leveraged our digital capabilities and our technology to make sure we have business continuity, and to make sure that we did not stop working, not even for a single hour, not stop serving our clients. Accordingly, we were very well equipped to have everyone work from home during the lockdown, and to allow people flexible hours, to allow people manage their lives, basically. Our gender-inclusive policies and the pay and all of that, coupled with our childcare, I forgot to mention also that, of course, within our environment, we do provide childcare for everyone in the organization, for men and their children, for women and their children. So with all of this, actually, we managed to have the lowest, we had the lowest percentage of women turnover in the last 4 years. So it happened to be a great time in that sense. We changed all of our management of work because of the pandemic, and it is management by objectives. And like with the pandemic and with the work from home, we had to change the way people manage their staff and their teams. So it was managing by objectives. And of course, this was a great opportunity for women. And today, our employee NPS is at 49%, which is, I think, one of the highest worldwide, not only in Jordan. And other than the internal angle of our team and our staff, also because of our women financial services and banking proposition, during the pandemic, we conducted something like maybe 350 Zoom sessions to help our female customers, to help our entrepreneurs, our SMEs during this time. And during this time, it was the time when they needed most advisory services, like how can you actually deal with distressed cash flows? How can you deal with crisis? How can you pivot? How can you change your business model? How can you move into online if you were only offline? And this was a great experience, and it really paid great results. And we see also, of course, that the digital business flourished during the pandemic, and in general, digital business is flourishing, and we see that as a great opportunity for women. To conclude, I would just say a few recommendations that from our experience we feel are very valid. Number one, we feel that what happened radically changed the workplace. And we feel in every challenge there is an opportunity. And if we started working from home, if we offered flexible working hours, if we worked digital, if we stopped papers and we worked online, then why come back? The thing is, these are all opportunities, they are all gains that we have now on the ground, so why go back? And why not just take it forward? The same way now we are paperless because of the pandemic. We have been trying to do that for years, and because of the pandemic we are completely paperless, so we're not going to go back on that. But then the issue becomes, how do these things become institutional? How do we make sure that it's not just up to me today to say that to my team and someone else not to say it? How do we make sure that the labor law will allow every woman in the workplace to demand her right of flexible working hours or of working from home when that is needed, and to be actually accountable for delivery, for what she achieves, rather than the number of hours that she's on the screen or that she is just behind a desk. The other thing is that, of course, in my recommendations always, and Salma mentioned it, mentioned that data is always the number one recommendation. Gender disaggregated data or segregated data is very important, because you can never manage what you cannot measure. The other thing I would say is that I always say that if you talk about government and government policy, if you talk about corporate policy, gender has to become a cross-cutting theme. It has to be a culture. It has to be in your DNA. Having a vertical in the government, having just a ministry looking at that, or having a vertical in an organization will never cut it. Unless it is really woven in everything that you do, in your thinking, it's not ever going to survive. I would say that equal pay for equal value is the way to go. And promoting, of course, women participation in decision-making is always important, whether in the bank, in the government, in any institution. And I would say also that, like an organization like us could be one that believed in this cause, and you could say that we could be a role models for other organizations. But having His Excellency as captive audience here, I would say that the government needs to give incentives, really, because if you're going to wait for the natural progression and the natural evolution, it's going to take ages. You really need to give incentives. I mean, like organizations who get a gender seal or who get a certain certification should get some kind of privilege in social security, in labor status, in incentive, even if it's the smallest tax incentive, I don't know, but I would say you have to move the needle, because this is really something that is so crucial for the country as a whole. The other thing we learned, but yet we're figuring out what to do with, is that COVID taught us that mental health for the family, for the workers, for the teams at large is very important, and we need to take care of it and see what can we do about it. And I would say that, of course, as always, advisory services and coaching and mentorship are all elements that are very important to women, because we're starting from a disadvantaged point over starting point. So we really need to focus on this as much as possible. And as such, I think, addressing what His Excellency said and what Salma said, for the daycare, though we are an organization that actually provides daycare 100%, but I would say that that is part of the solution. The other part is to really institutionally allow women to actually work from home, to do flexible work, facilitate their integration in the digital economy more and more, for them to have a better opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Your Excellency. And I mean, I believe, like most of those who are listening to us and most of the audience, one question we have in our mind is, do you have any job opportunities at Bank Al Ittihad? I mean, those incentives, this is one thing that we most definitely would love to see, both in governmental and private sectors. I mean, where I work as well, I have to admit, they are simply wonderful. And you can tell when an employee, whether it was a man or a woman, is being well treated, has incentives, is listened to, and most importantly is cared for. That's when you can see it being reflected on the outcome of the employee himself or herself. So thank you and chapeau. And let's hope this business model would be an actual model to the rest of the companies in Jordan, especially with the flexible hours. Absolutely love that. Allow us to move on to our last but definitely not least speaker, Her Excellency Miss Maria Hadiotia, the Ambassador of the European Union to Jordan. Good evening and welcome. So when we're talking about the international community, continues to be an important partner for Jordan, most definitely, supporting national priorities on community resilience and women's economic empowerment, like other contexts, the peace, development, humanitarian nexus. It provides various entry points to reinforce innovative approaches towards job creation and entrepreneurship. And we can say that it can impact, I would say, help counter actually the economic impact of the pandemic with enhanced efficiency, and at the same time remedy the gender imbalances that are present. So against this background and what I've just mentioned, what are the strategic directions and instruments that the EU is prioritizing in the partnership with the government of Jordan at this point, and in specific after the pandemic?
Thank you very much, Aline, and thank you for the invitation to participate in this UN talk, obviously on an issue that, as Andres mentioned in the beginning, we all want to achieve the same thing. So it's particularly important, and thank you for all the audience who's listening to this. As you know, the European Union is a front runner in promoting gender equality, and it's a key political objective for us. So this is also one of the elements of our external action, and this is what we're trying to also move forward in our relationship with Jordan. As you know, it's guided by our partnership priorities, and within that cooperation, a very good cooperation that we have with Jordan, we try to combine gender mainstreaming, political dialogue, and targeted actions in the field of women empowerment. So let me explain a little bit. I mean, you already mentioned, and there was a very good presentation on the impacts of the COVID-19 in the country. I mean, there was a global impact altogether. So I'm not going to mention what previous speakers mentioned, but I will start by saying a little bit on where we come from in what our actions are. Our actions are basically guided by the European Union's action plan for gender equality and women's empowerment in external action for the period 2021-2025. And our main aim is to accelerate progress on empowering women and girls. Even the document's title itself, it's putting women and girls' rights in the heart of global recovery for a gender equal world. And I think that says a lot on which direction we want to follow. And based on these general guidelines from our headquarters, we have developed, as EU delegation here in Jordan, our own country implementation report, and our own programming takes into account all these priorities. Our approach has three core principles. It's a gender transformative approach, which means that we're examining, questioning, and changing, hoping to be able to change along with all our partners the rigid gender norms and imbalances that exist in the system. We're also trying to address gender as an intersectoral issue, not just looking at gender by itself, but looking, as Nadia mentioned, it's not just up and down, but it's cut across many, many areas of cooperation. And of course, adopting approaches that are relevant to human rights and fighting gender-based violence, which has unfortunately also increased globally during the COVID pandemic and the restrictions that have been imposed everywhere to address that. So we try to have a holistic approach. We're not the only donor who's looking into it, but we're one of the donors, and we're working with the partners here and with UN Women and JNCW on that as well. Through the years, we have tried to support actions on training opportunities for women, scholarship. We supported Oasis centers, access to health, access to services provided by the Ministry of Social Development, and of course combating violence against women and girls. But one thing also that we're particularly interested, and it's very, very important to be able to enhance women's participation in the labor market, is also the need for them to participate in the political processes. Because if they don't participate in their local communities, in their national parliaments, where decisions are taken, where legislation is being changed, and this is where Dr. Nims mentioned also earlier, if they're not there, then as much as the private sector is trying to do things, it's more on an individual, on its own cluster, as Nadia mentioned. But what we want to see, it's something that multiplies across sectors, and this is an important thing for us. So it's important to have participation in political and economic life. It's important to find women, to have women finding themselves in inclusive environments, in environments that enable them to grow and feel that they can contribute, and an environment where their own reflections, their own priorities of mothers or caretakers but also sometimes as representatives or more disadvantaged groups, perhaps due to education, due to background, due to social structures, are enable them to bring this in and give a direction to the political leadership, to the government, to the legislation direction. What are the real needs? I mean, childcare is one of the real needs. There's many, many more that women that we talk to identify. And of course, what we have seen from our own experience is that when women are in public office, they also prioritize a lot more the well-being of their communities as a whole. So they're looking into things from a different perspective. So that's why we also think that's an important area to engage with. So we do engage in all these things, and sometimes we start from the small and the local level. One of our programs we just started is on improving integrity and accountability in the public administration. But I think once that starts, it can be amplified in many, many other sectors. And within that, not only are we going to support practices of civil society on like to be gender sensitive on their policies, but also, for example, even target gender sensitive budgeting is something we discussed previously with Dr. Nims in the past. Is something that sometimes is not really taken into consideration. And also engage women in planning and thinking even when we're discussing within our own delegation about how we deal with lockdowns, teleworking and all that. We also had to take into account the mothers who are staying home trying to telework and cook and mind the children. So you need to engage them in this planning to be able to be much more effective in what you're trying to do at the end. We also tried to look at the silver lining from COVID, and one of the things that Nadia mentioned it is the digitalization, and how that can give opportunities for more women engagement, and particularly more so in the private sector. We've witnessed that during the pandemic there have been possibilities for women to engage due to new job creation as well, different forms of job creation, and we hope that we will be able to move it forward in the future. We're looking at stepping up our cooperation with the central bank on financial inclusion and leveraging microfinance through promoting financial literacy in rural areas, particularly for women, because they're the ones who have been excluded a lot from accessing funds, or had they been able to access them, they have been taken advantage of, and at the end they're the ones who end up in jail because the loans have not been paid. So we need this part of education as well. We're also currently running a program called Innovate Jordan. It's a 20 million euro program with the private sector that aims to boost digital skills, trainings, engagement in fab labs, and basically interventions in the IT sector with particular focus on women and youth. So all in all, I mean, our aim is to incentivize women's development and empowerment, particularly also raise women's awareness from themselves and for their families and for the wider public about the potential, the contribution they can make, and the benefit they can offer by inclusion. And at the end of the day, it's 50% of the population that can contribute a lot more to the progress and prosperity of Jordan. So, thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I mean, 100%. Focusing on women, the different partnerships that are being done by the EU, are we talking about governmental, private, or both sectors?
Both.
Both.
So it's mostly through government, but now we're venturing also more to going directly to having cooperation with the private sector.
All right.
But it's a new area of cooperation for us.
I would like to go with a very straightforward, very honest question, and I would absolutely love to hear an answer from you. Dealing with both sectors, governmental and private, this is my, what, honestly, because if there is a problem, we are here to face it. If we have an issue, we are here to talk about it in order to find women in an active role in the economy. What was easier, dealing with the private sector or with the or with the governmental sector, and why?
Well, working with the governmental sector was a more natural thing for us to start off, right, because that's where We've always been, as a representative of governments as well, this is what we know how to do best. And of course, our cooperation is based on international agreements that we have between the European Union and the government of Jordan.
Right.
So that's how we start. But of course, gradually as things develop, as challenges change, but also as opportunities develop, we look also into what can be done in cooperation with the private sector. Of course, all in all, I mean, everything is aligned with what the government wants to achieve. So we're not diverging away from all the targets that the government wants to achieve. I think everybody would like to see more women participating in the workforce in Jordan. So it's just sometimes things move faster in the private sector than in the government sector, but that's a reality everywhere.
True. That's 100% true. Thank you so much, Your Excellency. So I would like to ask the audience if you have any reflections that you would like to share with our speakers. You will receive the mic, sir.
Good evening. Thank you very much for this interesting session. My name is Naif Stetiye. I am from BDC, Business Development Center. First of all, it's a comment, and at the same time, it's a question for His Excellency Mr. Hazim Rahahle. We are implementing different programs that has to do with supporting and engaging women in the business sector. One of the major projects that we are managing is a project funded by the EU. It's under the Madad Fund, and it's one of the largest, outreaching over 5,000 women in the governorates in particular. When we started this project, and we had other projects that we are doing with UNICEF, UNDP, and we did some projects with UN Women. All of them are in governorates or at the Syrian camps, Za'atari Azraq and others. When we started working in 57 different villages, and here we are talking about the governorates in particular, we found that there is a lot of unfairness with working with women in these areas, and unemployment in these areas is much more than in Amman. We see more that the concern of empowering or engaging women, it's in the capital, whether it is in the capital, Amman, or whether it is in the major capital of the governorates. But there is nothing in the remote areas, while the unemployment there is over 70%. And I just want to bring an example. When we work with Madad, we helped over 375 women in 57 different villages to start, in 9 villages to start their own businesses. And it was in different professions. One of them was in maintenance, and the other one was in photography, and the other one was in mainly cooking, but not professional kitchens, not productive kitchens. It was mainly different type of. And when the pandemic happened, like in Msherfe or in some villages in Ajloun and in Azra and other areas, 95% of males in these governorates were working in the army. So the villages were left without anyone to do anything. So no maintenance, no bakeries, no nothing. And at that time, everybody realized that only the trained women were capable of delivering the services in these villages, and they start making funds. They start making income. And that gave them, it empowered them and engaged them. So when now the pandemic is almost less restrictions, they have sustainable income. So they were those in villages. I think what the main reason I'm talking about this is we feel that there is a very minimal interventions for the government, not only for the donors are trying their best, but the government is not engaging a lot of the services or reaching out for the people, for the women in particular, especially in the remote areas. I'm not talking about the capitals. I'm not talking about the major governorates. I'm talking about outreaching for more women in the remote areas. Thank you.
Yes, Your Excellency.
Why they have the readiness and the eagerness of really working very hard.
Yes, well understood, Your Excellency. عطوفتك تفضل.
To some extent beyond the role of social security. I can, we don't have a direct role in employment. We are just an enabler. So I agree with you on the side that we should extend coverage to remote areas. But you know, they are mainly working in their you know, job types are not considered as a formal. So that's why we have went through issuing a new bylaw, you know, addressing the needs of different types of works. So now with the flexi work arrangements that we have recently introduced, I think this particular problem would be adequately addressed. Thank you.
All right. So we'd like to thank your presence with us today, and we would like to take more reflections from the audience. Any other comments that you would like to share with us? Please, sir.
Thanks a lot for this interesting session. Really, we have in Jordan more than 500,000 technicians. Most of them, sure, are more than 99% of them are men, not women. If we need to work in this sector, if we need to organize this sector, we need to work together, really. I mean, as a governmental sector, private sector, as initiative. I'm Mohammed Ghazal, founder of Careers of Gold Initiative.
Right. Sorry for the interruption, but once again, in which sector are we talking about?
I'm talking about vocational sector.
Vocation. Okay.
Yes. 99% of these technicians are men, not women. And we are trying a lot to encourage women to go to this sector. It's not easy at all. If we don't work together, if we don't cooperate together, I think the equation still as is, 90% or more men and less than 1% are women. We need more incentives to encourage ladies to go to this sector. We need a safe environment to encourage her again to go to this sector.
I'm sorry, I will have to cut it here. We understand your question. We would like to reflect to Dr. Salma, بعد إذنك.
Thank you so much. It was on one of the points that I had in my comments. Can someone yeah, thank you. Actually, in the addendum of the National Women's Strategy, and actually even in the National Women's Strategy, there is another the issue of women in vocational training and untraditional work sectors are issues that are in the National Women's Strategy, in our Women Economic Empowerment Plan adopted by the government in 2018 that was included and aligned in the National Women's Strategy. We are working in this through also the support of the Mashraq Gender Fund that is supported by the World Bank. And we are working on several parallels on this. First of all, yes, we do need, the problem is that we have been traditionally pushed women into traditional vocational jobs. And we find that, and now also with what Naif was saying, this is what we've been saying. We've been pushing women in the same jobs, food production, hairdressers, and traditional sewing, and then they're not even able to market those products, and because you find that we say it in Arabic, you know, they're selling مية بحارة السقايين, يعني they are all selling the same product in the same place. So in the end, there is no really leverage for them or any extra income coming because of the competition. And this is where we have been. That's why I was talking about the priority program for the government. It did not touch upon this. It did not touch on how do we direct women to non-traditional jobs. It did not touch upon how do we leverage different, which is something that the National Strategy talked about, fixing mobile phones, photography. These are areas that actually, maintenance of cars, all areas that actually women sometimes want to go to women for them. Privacy of your mobile phone is an issue in a Jordanian context. Women prefer to give their phone to a woman because they feel more safe about giving them their phones. It's the same of having segregated parties where you need more female photographers. Taking my car to a mechanic, I feel safer going to a woman. So all of these areas, unfortunately, we talk about them, but we don't see real policies or plans directed towards that. We also are working on campaigns now. We will be implementing 4 campaigns relating to increasing women's access to the labor market. One of them is encouraging women towards non-traditional jobs. And another is, since you were talking about what different programs are giving in the government, we're going to have an informative campaign about what are the programs that have already been adopted by the government that women actually don't know about. And this is important. And the third thing with looking at Mr. Mohandes Ayman Mazahre, it's also, let's talk about digitalization. You know, now Jordan is planning, looking at the, preparing the digitalization, digital transformation plan. Great, it's a great opportunity. But we have a few concerns that we need to look at. First, access, equal access. We still have girls who got out of education because there is no access to the internet. They are unable to pay for the expensive packages of internet. They don't have smart devices. So when we're talking about this, we need to talk to even about access to basic rights. I want to get a vaccination. I need to know how to access the platform. I need to get an e-wallet in order to sell my products without having a bank account. All of these issues have to be done in a sensitive way for women's needs in situations in our government. The other part is when you do the digital transformation, who are going to benefit from it in terms of education? You know, those who have already been educated in that field will get more jobs, but there are people who are going to be getting out of jobs. How are we preparing for that? Are we looking at this? This is another issue. And third, it's the inclusion, financial inclusion. We need women not only to access banking. Women, when my income is 200 JD, 250 JD, I'm not going to open a bank account. We need to see how they will be able to have e-wallets and an easy access. We did an assessment, a rapid assessment during COVID with the ILO about accessing e-wallets for women to get alimony, to be paid to get their salaries. We found out that they are suffering. They stopped even working on to actually set up the account because it was complicated. So these are all issues that sadly we talk about them, but we don't see real programs going there. And how do we encourage women to go to different non-traditional jobs in the vocational market? And how are we going to make it even socially? Till today, we deal with the vocational field as if it's the field for those who failed. And this is a problem. Right. You need to find out from your 15 years old, what is your passion? And then regularize these non-traditional vocational jobs into something that is seen as respectful, gives an income, and that people trust those who are working in them and see them at a social status. Look at the German example. 100%. And I think that's a very important example when we talk about it.
Right. Dr. Salma, thank you so much. And it's all about breaking the taboos, or what people look at as taboos in any community. And that's most definitely one of the things that we are focusing on. So as we come to an end via our panel discussion for today, Mr. Anders Pedersen, I would like to get back to you. And I would like to hear real quick your reflection, since we heard the different, I would say, parts of the Jordanian community, and of course outside of the Jordanian community, where we're standing right now. The UN talk, what we're doing right now, listening to people, getting their reflections and hearing the different points of views, private and governmental sectors. Where are we standing and what do you think?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, all of you coming for this UN talk, and thank you, all of you, having participated. You know what? There's an abundance of negative information on gender equality and women's economic empowerment on Jordan out there. I'm actually inundated with negative information. Today, I think I have actually changed. And I'm extremely happy by the way that our colleagues representing the public sector together with the private sector has really demonstrated that change is possible. I think I'm hereby nominating you game changers, what we were actually looking for. I think people like Maria and I, and we work very closely on this, we want to support precisely people and institutions such as yours. And with people like Selma behind, I think we have the absolute perfect recipe for this to be able to move. I think this has been a phenomenally inspiring evening in that regard. And you know what? I'm going to end with a very encouraging information, a piece that I think that you will like. While we were speaking, while we were having this UN talk here tonight, you know what? A Jordanian woman has just been officially appointed by the UN Secretary General as the new Executive Director of UN Women. Her Excellency Sima Bahous, the previous UN representative or the previous Jordanian ambassador to the United Nations in Jordan, is hereby, well, it's your boss, Siad, and it's definitely our spokesperson on gender equality of the United Nations. Well done, Jordan. Thank you for tonight. A really inspiring evening for all of us.
I would like to thank my outstanding panelists and, of course, Her Excellency Miss Maria Hadiotia, and I'm sorry if I misspelled it. I'm really sorry about that. Of course, the Ambassador of the European Union to Jordan, Her Excellency Ms. Nadia Said, CEO of Bank Al-Ittihad and Women Empowerment Principles signatory, His Excellency Dr. Hazem Rahahle, Director General of the Social Security Corporation, Dr. Salma Nim, Secretary General of the Jordan National Commission for Women, and of course, Mr. Anders Patterson, UN Resident Coordinator. Thank you so much. It was such a great honor to be part of this outstanding panel discussion, and make sure you enjoy this wonderful evening. Ladies and gentlemen, with this we come to an end to our panel discussion and our meeting. We wish you an outstanding evening and good night.